Captain Marcus Stone pressed his back against the blast-scorched wall of what had once been Kepler Station's primary command center, listening to the distinctive whine of Zephyrian energy weapons growing closer through the twisted corridors. 6 months of siege warfare had reduced humanity's last strategic foothold in the outer rim to a maze of rubble and desperate defensive positions, and Marcus knew with grim certainty that the end was finally at hand. "Captain," Sergeant Walsh's voice crackled through his damaged comm unit, "perimeter squads report Zephyrian assault forces massing on levels 7 through 12. Estimate 2,000 hostiles, full combat armor, heavy weapons support." Marcus closed his eyes briefly, running the numbers that had haunted his sleep for weeks. 2,000 fresh Zephyrian warriors against his remaining force of 187 exhausted human soldiers, most of whom were wounded, all of whom were running on fumes and desperation. "Copy that, Walsh. Fall back to the central redoubt and prep the charges on the outer bulkheads. If we're going down, we're taking as many of them with us as possible." But even as he gave the order, Marcus's mind was working through alternatives that his training said didn't exist. In the lower levels of the station, 3,000 civilian refugees, families of military personnel, research scientists, support staff, waited in makeshift shelters, believing that somehow the human military would find a way to protect them. The sound of advancing Zephyrian forces grew louder, accompanied by the methodical destruction of the last automated defenses. Marcus had fought the Zephyrians for 3 years across a dozen worlds, and he'd learned to read the rhythm of their attacks. This wasn't the cautious probing of a siege force testing defenses, this was the final assault of an enemy confident in overwhelming victory. "Sir," came another voice through the comm, this one from Lieutenant Hayes in the refugee sectors, "civilian leadership is asking for status updates. They want to know if evacuation is still possible." Marcus stared at the tactical display showing Zephyrian ships surrounding the station in a perfect sphere of destruction. No evacuation was possible. No rescue was coming. The best he could offer his people was a fighting death instead of execution. But as he watched the display, Marcus noticed something that sparked a desperate idea. The Zephyrian formation wasn't designed to prevent escape, it was designed to ensure complete destruction. They wanted to eliminate Kepler Station as a symbol of human resistance, which meant they might be willing to negotiate if offered something more valuable than a Pyrrhic victory. "Walsh, Hayes, all squad leaders," he transmitted on the command frequency. "Hold positions but do not engage unless directly fired upon. I'm going to try something. Sir." Walsh's voice carried the confusion of a veteran soldier hearing orders that made no tactical sense. "I'm going to surrender." The silence that followed was deafening. In 3 years of warfare, no human unit had ever surrendered to the Zephyrians. Their warrior culture considered surrender a form of insult, and captured humans were typically executed immediately rather than imprisoned. "Captain," Lieutenant Hayes said carefully, "surrender isn't going to save the civilians. The Zephyrians don't take prisoners." "No," Marcus agreed, "but they do honor negotiations conducted by military commanders. I'm going to offer them something they want more than a glorious victory." What the Zephyrians wanted, Marcus had realized, was to end this war with human resistance broken but human civilization intact enough to serve as either allies or servants. Total extermination would give them empty worlds, negotiated surrender would give them a defeated but potentially useful population. Marcus opened a general communication channel on the frequency used for military parleys, broadcasting in the broken Zephyrian he'd learned during previous prisoner exchanges. "Zephyrian Command, this is Captain Marcus Stone, Commanding Officer of Kepler Station Defense Forces. I request audience for negotiation of surrender terms." The response came within minutes, transmitted in accented but clear English. "Human Captain, you are granted audience. Present yourself at main docking bay 7 with token escort. You have 1 hour." Marcus selected 3 volunteers, soldiers who understood they might not return, and made his way through the station's damaged corridors to what would either be his execution or humanity's salvation. The main docking bay had been sealed against atmospheric breach but was otherwise a monument to the futility of their resistance: blast craters, twisted metal, and the ghostly outlines where defensive positions had been vaporized by Zephyrian heavy weapons. The Zephyrian shuttle that docked precisely on time was a work of art and engineering that made human technology look primitive by comparison. When the airlock cycled, the warriors who emerged were living demonstrations of why humanity was losing this war. They stood nearly 7 feet tall, their metallic blue skin marked with intricate silver patterns that indicated rank and battle honors. Their armor seemed to flow like liquid metal while providing protection that could shrug off human weapons' fire. Most intimidating of all was their bearing, the absolute confidence of beings born to war and shaped by millennia of conquest. But it was their leader who commanded Marcus's complete attention. Queen Lyrazon of the Zephyrian Empire stepped through the airlock with the kind of presence that made gravity itself seem negotiable. She was everything the intelligence briefings had described and more. Tall even by Zephyrian standards, her blue skin marked with the elaborate silver tracery that indicated royal bloodline, her movements combining lethal grace with unmistakable authority. Marcus had expected to meet with a field commander or diplomatic representative. Facing the queen herself was like discovering that your chess opponent was actually a grandmaster who had been playing dozens of moves ahead from the beginning. "Captain Stone," she said, her English carrying only the slightest accent, "you have requested audience for surrender. This is unexpected. Your species typically chooses death before dishonor." "Your Majesty," Marcus replied, offering the formal bow that Zephyrian protocol required, "death achieves nothing. I'm here to discuss terms that might serve both our peoples." Queen Lyrazon studied him with eyes that seemed to catalog every detail, his battered armor, his obvious exhaustion, the way he held himself despite wounds that would have felled lesser soldiers. Marcus found himself being evaluated not as an enemy to be destroyed but as a puzzle to be solved. What terms could a defeated human commander possibly offer that would interest the Zephyrian Empire? Safe passage for 3,000 civilians in exchange for the complete surrender of Kepler Station and all military assets. No resistance, no sabotage, no final gestures of defiance. And why should we honor such terms when we can simply take the station and eliminate the civilians as a security measure? Marcus met her gaze directly, understanding that this moment would determine the fate of everyone under his protection. Because Queen Lyrazon of the Zephyrian Empire is known throughout the galaxy for honor in warfare. Because your people's strength comes from noble conquest, not massacre of innocents. And because accepting surrender from humans sets a precedent that might prevent future bloodshed on both sides. The Queen was silent for a long moment, studying him with an intensity that made Marcus feel like a specimen under examination. When she finally spoke, her words carried the weight of absolute authority. "Captain Stone, your terms are acceptable. The civilians will be granted safe passage to neutral territory. Your soldiers will lay down their arms and submit to imprisonment according to the laws of warfare. You personally will accompany me to the imperial capital for questioning regarding human military capabilities and strategic intentions." Marcus felt relief flood through him like a physical force. 3,000 innocent lives would be saved. His remaining soldiers would live as prisoners rather than die as casualties. It was more than he had dared hope for. "I accept these terms, Your Majesty." "Then let us proceed." As they walked back toward the Zephyrian shuttle, Queen Lyrazon spoke quietly, "Captain Stone, I am curious about something. Why did you choose surrender? Your military records indicate a preference for aggressive tactics and personal combat. This negotiation seems inconsistent with your nature." Marcus considered the question as they approached the shuttle that would carry him into captivity. "Your Majesty, sometimes the bravest thing a soldier can do is recognize when fighting will only make things worse." "Interesting perspective," she replied. "We shall have much to discuss during your imprisonment." As the shuttle carried them away from Kepler Station, Marcus watched through the viewport as Zephyrian ships moved into position around the facility he had surrendered. The sight should have filled him with shame or regret, but instead he felt something approaching peace. He had saved every life he could save. He had chosen the future over the past, possibility over pride. And though he didn't understand why, he found himself looking forward to those discussions Queen Lyrazon had mentioned. Something in her eyes suggested that she was as curious about him as he was becoming about her. The war was far from over, but perhaps, just perhaps, this surrender might be the first step toward something better than endless conflict. Marcus settled back in his seat, his hands already beginning to bear the marks of restraints that would become scars, and wondered what kind of man he would become in Zephyrian captivity. He had no idea that his decision to fight for rather than against his enemy would change everything. The morning sun of Zephyr Prime cast long shadows through the energy barriers of detention facility Omega-7, where Captain Marcus Stone had spent the last 3 years becoming something he'd never expected, a legend. The scars told the story better than any official record. Jagged lines across his forearms where interrogation devices had sought to break his will. Burns on his shoulders from the time he tried to short-circuit the facility's power grid during an escape attempt. The careful way he moved his left leg, testament to bones broken during his second year of captivity when he'd led a prisoner uprising that had taken 4 days to suppress. Stone. Guard Captain Velthor's voice echoed through the cell block with its usual mixture of annoyance and grudging respect. You have a visitor. Marcus looked up from the book he'd been reading, a Zephyrian text on military philosophy that he'd somehow convinced the guards to provide. 3 years of captivity had given him an education in his captor's culture that no human had ever received, along with a fluency in their language that impressed even his interrogators. Official or unofficial, he asked, using the distinction that had developed over the months. Official visitors meant interrogators, psychologists, or military analysts trying to extract information. Unofficial visitors meant the occasional curious Zephyrian academic or philosopher who'd heard about the human prisoner who could discuss their literature and tactical theories. Royal, Velthor said, and Marcus saw something approaching nervousness in the guard's metallic blue features. Royal meant Queen Lyrazon herself, which was unprecedented. In 3 years, she had never personally visited the facility, though Marcus had been told she received regular reports on his unique form of resistance. Marcus stood carefully, noting the way his various injuries had healed imperfectly without proper medical care. The Zephyrians kept him alive and functional, but they weren't interested in returning him to peak physical condition. Not when his repeated escape attempts had earned him a reputation that extended far beyond the walls of Omega-7. The walk to the visitation chamber took them through corridors lined with cells holding prisoners from a dozen different worlds, humans, yes, but also members of other species who had opposed Zephyrian expansion. Marcus nodded to familiar faces, noting how his presence seemed to straighten spines and lift chins even among the most defeated captives. He'd become more than just another prisoner. Somehow, his refusal to break had made him a symbol of resistance that transcended species boundaries. The visitation chamber was different from the interrogation rooms Marcus knew so well. Larger, more comfortable, with actual furniture instead of restraint chairs. A table had been set with what appeared to be refreshments, and morning light streamed through windows that offered a view of the capital city's crystal spires. Queen Lyrazon stood with her back to the door, looking out at her domain with the bearing of someone who had never questioned her right to rule entire worlds. 3 years had changed her less than they had changed Marcus. She remained a figure of absolute authority, her blue skin marked with silver patterns that seemed more elaborate than he remembered. Your Majesty, Marcus said, offering the same respectful nod he'd given during their first meeting at Kepler Station. She turned, and Marcus saw something in her violet eyes that hadn't been there before, curiosity mixed with what might have been concern. Captain Stone. Please, sit. We have much to discuss. Marcus took the offered chair, noting how she studied his movements, his obvious stiffness, the careful way he positioned himself to accommodate old injuries. Her gaze lingered on the scars visible above his prisoner uniform's collar, and he saw her expression tighten almost imperceptibly. You look. She paused, as if searching for diplomatic phrasing. Like someone who's spent 3 years in a Zephyrian prison. Marcus suggested with dark humor. I assure you, Your Majesty, I've been treated according to the laws of warfare. Have you? Her tone carried an edge that made Marcus look at her more carefully. The reports I receive speak of repeated escape attempts, prisoner uprisings, and what my security chief calls persistent non-compliance with interrogation protocols. I prefer to think of it as maintaining military discipline under adverse conditions. Queen Lyrazon moved to the table, pouring what smelled like some form of Zephyrian tea into 2 cups. Captain Stone, I want you to understand that your reputation has extended far beyond this facility. Stories of the human who cannot be broken have become something of a legend among my people. I'm sure there are more interesting topics of conversation in the Empire. Perhaps. But few that have prompted me to personally review prisoner treatment protocols and interrogation procedures. She set a cup before him, her movements precise but somehow gentler than he expected. The methods used to extract information from you have been aggressive. Marcus sipped the tea, surprised by its complexity, nothing like the nutrition paste that constituted most of his meals. Your Majesty, if you're concerned about my comfort, I should point out that I'm a prisoner of war, not a guest. Indeed. Which brings me to why I'm here. Queen Lyrazon settled into her own chair, her posture maintaining royal dignity while somehow becoming more approachable. The war between our peoples has continued for 3 years since Kepler Station. Both sides have suffered enormous casualties. Military analysts suggest that neither civilization can sustain this level of conflict indefinitely. An assessment I reached 2 years ago, Marcus said quietly. Which is why preliminary discussions have begun through neutral intermediaries regarding possible prisoner exchanges and ceasefire negotiations. Marcus felt something that might have been hope stir in his chest, though he was careful not to let it show on his face. And you're telling me this because you would be among the first prisoners considered for exchange. Your value as a strategic asset makes you a natural candidate for high-level negotiations. My value as a strategic asset? Queen Lyrazon leaned forward slightly, her violet eyes intense. Captain, in 3 years of captivity, you have revealed precisely 0 pieces of actionable intelligence. Your resistance to interrogation is absolute. Yet your knowledge of human military capabilities and strategic thinking is clearly extensive. I'm a soldier, Your Majesty. I follow the code of conduct. You are more than a soldier, she said firmly. You are someone who has maintained perfect discipline under conditions that would break most beings. You are someone who led prisoner uprisings not for personal benefit but to improve conditions for others. You are someone who has somehow earned the respect of your captors while never yielding to their authority. Marcus studied her face, trying to understand where this conversation was leading. Your Majesty, what exactly are you asking me? I'm asking you to explain something that my advisors cannot understand. You were captured defending a strategic position that you ultimately surrendered to save civilian lives. You have endured 3 years of imprisonment that could have been shortened or made more comfortable if you had simply provided military intelligence. Your behavior suggests someone fighting for principles rather than mere survival. She paused, her gaze moving to the scars on his arms, the visible evidence of his refusal to cooperate with interrogations that could have purchased better treatment. Tell me, Captain Stone, who were you fighting so hard for that you would endure this rather than surrender information that could have made your captivity bearable? The question hung in the air between them like a challenge. Marcus looked at this woman who had ordered his capture, who ruled the empire that had shattered human defenses across a dozen worlds, who represented everything his military training had taught him to oppose. And yet, as he met her violet eyes, Marcus realized that his answer was both simpler and more complex than she could possibly understand. For you, he said quietly. Queen Lyrazon's cup stopped halfway to her lips. Her violet eyes widened, and for a moment the absolute composure that marked Zephyrian royalty cracked enough to reveal genuine shock. I beg your pardon. I fought for you, Your Majesty. Everything I've endured, every piece of information I've protected, every escape attempt that earned me new scars, it was all for you. She set down her cup with movements that spoke of someone whose world had just shifted in ways she didn't understand. Captain Stone, we are enemies. I ordered your capture. Your suffering is the direct result of my decisions. Yes, Marcus agreed. And if I had given your interrogators the information they wanted, it would have led to human defeats that would have ultimately destroyed both our civilizations. Explain. Marcus leaned back in his chair, wincing slightly as old injuries protested the movement. Your Majesty, 3 years of captivity have given me an education in Zephyrian culture, military doctrine, and strategic thinking. I've learned enough about your people to understand something that your own advisors may not see clearly. Which is that total victory over humanity would destroy the Zephyrian Empire as surely as total defeat would destroy us. Queen Lyrazon stared at him, her expression cycling through confusion, skepticism, and something that might have been the beginning of understanding. Captain Stone, she said slowly, are you telling me that you've spent 3 years protecting both our peoples by refusing to help either side achieve decisive victory? I'm telling you that someone who truly wished to harm the Zephyrian Empire would have cooperated fully with interrogation, providing intelligence that would have led to quick human defeats and Zephyrian overextension. The silence that followed was profound. Outside the windows, the crystal spires of the capital city caught the morning light, creating patterns of brilliance that seemed to echo the complexity of what Marcus had just revealed. Finally, Queen Lyrazon spoke, her voice carrying a note of wonder that had nothing to do with her royal authority. You protected me by defying me. I protected both of us by refusing to let this war become the mutual annihilation that someone clearly wants it to become. Someone? Marcus met her gaze directly. Your Majesty, in 3 years of studying your people's military doctrine and strategic philosophy, I've identified patterns that suggest external manipulation of this conflict. Forces that benefit from prolonged warfare between two of the galaxy's most powerful civilizations. Queen Lyrazon was very still, her violet eyes fixed on his face with an intensity that made him feel like she was seeing him clearly for the first time. Captain Stone, she said finally, I believe we have a great deal more to discuss. The weeks following Queen Lyrazon's visit to detention facility Omega-7 brought changes that no one in either government could have predicted. For the first time in the war's history, a human prisoner was transferred from military detention to diplomatic quarters within the Royal Palace complex, where Captain Marcus Stone found himself in the unprecedented position of serving as both captive and advisor to the Zephyrian Empire's highest leadership. The intelligence patterns you've identified are disturbing, High Admiral Thexron admitted during their third joint analysis session. The Zephyrian military leader spread holographic displays across the conference table, showing troop movements, supply routes, and battle outcomes from the past 3 years. External weapons sales to both sides, coordinated timing of offensives, strategic information leaks that prolonged rather than resolved conflicts. Marcus studied the data with the trained eye of someone who had spent years fighting this war from the human perspective. Your Majesty, with respect, these patterns become even clearer when you overlay them with human military intelligence. Queen Lyrazon activated additional displays showing information that Marcus had provided, not classified human secrets, but analytical frameworks and strategic assessments that revealed how both sides had been maneuvered into increasingly destructive confrontations. The Kepler Station siege, she said, highlighting a tactical overview that showed both human and Zephyrian force deployments. According to your analysis, the timing was designed to maximize casualties on both sides rather than achieve quick victory for either. Exactly. If the goal had been Zephyrian strategic advantage, the attack would have come 6 months earlier when human defenses were weaker. If the goal had been to minimize Zephyrian losses, a blockade would have been more effective than direct assault. Marcus gestured to specific data points that supported his assessment. Instead, the timing and tactics were chosen to ensure maximum bloodshed and resource depletion. Suggesting that someone benefits from prolonged, destructive warfare between our civilizations, High Admiral Thexron concluded grimly. The military-industrial syndicate, Marcus said, speaking aloud the name that their investigation had uncovered. They've been selling advanced weapons to both sides while manipulating intelligence to ensure neither side could achieve decisive victory. Queen Lyrazon pulled up financial records that painted a disturbing picture of external influence. Syndicate corporations have profited enormously from this conflict. But more than that, they've been testing new weapons technologies using our war as a proving ground. Which means, Marcus realized with growing alarm, that our entire conflict has been a research and development program for weapons they plan to sell to other species. The revelation reframed everything about the war both sides had been fighting. What had seemed like legitimate strategic and territorial disputes now appeared to be artificially engineered conflict designed to serve external interests. Captain Stone, Queen Lyrazon said, her voice carrying the weight of someone making decisions that would reshape galactic politics, your resistance to interrogation prevented my intelligence services from gaining information that would have led to quick human defeats. Which would have allowed the Syndicate to market their weapons as Zephyrian Empire approved to other species considering military expansion, Marcus added. Your reputation for military excellence would have become their sales pitch. While quick Zephyrian defeats would have made human weapons technology attractive to species facing stronger opponents, the Queen continued. Either outcome would have expanded the market for their products. High Admiral Thexrun leaned back in his chair, his metallic blue features showing the strain of someone whose worldview had been fundamentally challenged. You're both saying that Captain Stone's personal resistance to interrogation disrupted a galactic weapons marketing scheme. I'm saying, Marcus replied carefully, that sometimes the most effective way to protect someone is to refuse to help them achieve goals that would ultimately harm them. Queen Lyrazon studied the scars on Marcus's arms, now clearly visible since his transfer to diplomatic quarters where he wore more formal clothing instead of prisoner uniforms. The jagged lines told the story of 3 years spent protecting information that would have served the Syndicate's interests rather than either civilization's true needs. You endured torture to protect my people from a victory that would have destroyed us, she said quietly. I endured inconvenience to protect both our peoples from manipulation that would have destroyed us, Marcus corrected, though his careful movement as he reached for a data pad betrayed the lasting effects of that inconvenience. Inconvenience, the Queen repeated, her tone suggesting she found his description inadequate. Your Majesty, physical discomfort is temporary. The consequences of revealing strategic intelligence to interrogators who were ultimately serving external interests would have been permanent. Their investigation had revealed the scope of Syndicate manipulation. False intelligence that had triggered specific battles, weapons sales timed to escalate conflicts just as peace negotiations seemed possible, and the systematic elimination of moderate voices on both sides who might have recognized the pattern. The question now, High Admiral Thexrun said, is how we proceed with this knowledge. Both our governments have been manipulated into mutual destruction. Simply ending hostilities won't address the external threat. No, Queen Lyrazon agreed. But joint action against the Syndicate might serve both our interests while establishing precedent for future cooperation. Marcus found himself in the surreal position of helping plan military operations against the organization that had orchestrated the war he'd spent 3 years fighting. His knowledge of human capabilities combined with Zephyrian resources created strategic possibilities that neither side could have achieved alone. The primary Syndicate weapons development facility is located in the neutral zone, he reported, displaying intelligence that human reconnaissance had gathered but never acted upon. Destroying it would cripple their ability to produce the advanced systems they've been selling to both sides. A joint strike would send a clear message that external manipulation of our relationship is unacceptable, Queen Lyrazon observed. But it would require unprecedented cooperation between human and Zephyrian forces. Cooperation that the Syndicate has spent 3 years ensuring would never happen, High Admiral Thexrun added. Which is exactly why it needs to happen, Marcus said firmly. Every successful joint operation proves that their manipulation can be overcome. The planning sessions that followed were unlike anything in the history of interspecies relations. Human and Zephyrian tactical doctrines were integrated for the first time, creating hybrid strategies that leveraged the strengths of both military traditions while compensating for their respective weaknesses. Marcus found himself working more closely with Queen Lyrazon than with anyone since his capture, their collaboration revealing the intellectual partnership that had been developing beneath the surface of their formal interactions. She understood strategic thinking at a level that matched his own, while her knowledge of galactic politics provided context that his purely military background had lacked. Captain, she said during one late-night planning session, I must ask you something that has been troubling me. Of course, Your Majesty. The scars you bear, they represent information you protected, pain you endured to serve what you saw as a greater good. But I need to understand. Was your resistance purely strategic, or was there something more personal in your motivations? Marcus paused in his analysis of tactical displays, considering her question. Over the weeks of working together, their relationship had evolved beyond captor and prisoner, beyond even military colleagues, into something that defied easy categorization. Your Majesty, when I first met you at Kepler Station, I saw something that our intelligence briefings had never mentioned. Which was honor. Genuine honor, not the political kind that gets manufactured for propaganda purposes. You could have simply destroyed the station and eliminated everyone aboard, but you chose to negotiate because it was the right thing to do. Marcus met her violet eyes directly. That's when I realized that defeating you would be a loss for the galaxy, not a victory for humanity. So your resistance was based on strategic assessment of my character. It was based on recognition that some people are worth protecting, even from themselves. Even from their own military successes. Queen Lyrazon was quiet for several minutes, studying the tactical displays without really seeing them. When she spoke again, her voice carried a vulnerability that Marcus had never heard from her before. Captain Stone, I must confess something. During your captivity, I received regular reports on your condition and behavior. I could have intervened to make your treatment more comfortable. I chose not to because I believed it would compromise your value as an intelligence asset. Your Majesty. I was wrong. Your value was never as a source of intelligence. It was as someone who could see patterns that we could not see, someone who understood that strength sometimes requires refusing to use the power you possess. The admission hung between them like a bridge across years of conflict and misunderstanding. Marcus understood that she was accepting responsibility not just for his suffering, but for the larger failure to recognize what he had been trying to accomplish through his resistance. The scars will fade, he said quietly. The knowledge we've gained together won't. Will they? Fade, I mean. Her gaze moved to the most prominent marks on his forearms, evidence of interrogation sessions that had left permanent reminders of his refusal to break. Some will. Others won't. But they're not symbols of defeat, Your Majesty. They're proof that some principles are worth defending regardless of the personal cost. Queen Lyrazon reached across the table, her fingers stopping just short of touching the jagged lines that marked his skin. May I? Marcus nodded, and she traced one of the scars with gentle precision, her touch somehow managing to acknowledge both the pain it represented and the courage that had created it. You fought for me by fighting against everything I thought I wanted, she said softly. You protected my people by refusing to help them achieve a victory that would have destroyed them. I protected both our peoples by refusing to let external forces turn us into instruments of mutual annihilation. And now? Now we prove that their manipulation failed. That two civilizations can choose cooperation over conflict, understanding over hatred, future over past. The joint strike against the Syndicate facility took place 3 weeks later, marking the first time in galactic history that human and Zephyrian forces had operated as allies rather than enemies. Marcus served as strategic coordinator, his unique position as someone trusted by both sides making him the natural choice to oversee the unprecedented cooperation. The operation succeeded beyond anyone's expectations, not just in destroying the Syndicate's primary weapons development center but in demonstrating that former enemies could become powerful allies when they chose truth over manufactured hatred. Standing in the command center aboard the Joint Task Force flagship, watching human and Zephyrian crews work together with seamless efficiency, Marcus felt something he hadn't experienced since his capture, hope for a future that transcended the endless cycle of conflict that had defined both their civilizations. Captain, Queen Lyrazon said, joining him at the observation viewport where he watched debris from the destroyed facility drifting among the stars, the preliminary peace negotiations begin next week. Both sides have requested your participation as an advisor. It would be an honor, Your Majesty. There's something else. The Zephyrian Imperial Council has voted to offer you a formal position as liaison between our civilizations. Ambassador Stone has a nice sound to it, don't you think? Marcus turned to look at her, noting how the starlight caught the silver patterns in her blue skin, how her expression showed not just royal authority but personal satisfaction at his success. That's very generous, Your Majesty. But I should point out that accepting such a position would mean permanent residence in Zephyrian space. Yes, she said simply. It would. The implication hung between them like a question that neither quite dared to ask directly. Marcus's original mission to protect both their peoples had evolved into something larger, a partnership that had proven more effective than either could have achieved alone. Your Majesty, he said carefully, what exactly would my duties as liaison involve? Preventing future conflicts through improved understanding between our species. Identifying external threats before they can manipulate us into mutual destruction. Working closely with Imperial leadership to ensure that cooperation replaces competition as the foundation of our relationship. Working closely with Imperial leadership, Marcus repeated, understanding that she was offering him not just a job but a place in her inner circle of advisors. Very closely, she confirmed, her violet eyes holding depths that spoke of possibilities neither had dared consider during the years when they were officially enemies. Marcus looked at his scarred hands, reminders of the price he'd paid to protect both their peoples from forces that sought to destroy them through artificial conflict. Then he looked at Queen Lyrazan, the woman whose honor had inspired him to endure that pain rather than compromise principles that it seemed impossible to defend. Your Majesty, he said, I accept. The smile that lit her features was like sunrise after a long night, full of promise for a future that neither could have imagined when they first met across the negotiating table at Kepler Station. 5 years after the joint strike that destroyed the military-industrial syndicate's primary facility, Ambassador Marcus Stone stood in the crystal gardens of the Zephyrian Royal Palace, watching the binary sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. The scars on his arms had faded but never disappeared, serving as permanent reminders of the price he'd paid to protect two civilizations from forces that sought to destroy them through manufactured hatred. Ambassador, Queen Lyrazan's voice carried the warmth that had replaced the formal distance of their early interactions. The final treaty ratification ceremonies conclude tomorrow. Are you satisfied with the terms? Marcus turned to face her, noting how the evening light caught the silver patterns in her blue skin, how 5 years of peace had allowed both of them to become people their wartime selves could never have imagined. She no longer carried herself with the rigid authority of someone who expected constant challenge to her rule, while he had shed the defensive vigilance of a soldier always preparing for the next battle. More than satisfied, Your Majesty. The Mutual Defense and Cooperation Accord represents everything we hoped to achieve when we first uncovered the Syndicate's manipulation. The treaty they had spent years negotiating did far more than end the war between humans and Zephyrians. It established a framework for cooperation that had become a model for other species throughout the galaxy. Joint research initiatives, integrated military commands, cultural exchange programs, and economic partnerships that leveraged the strengths of both civilizations while protecting their unique characteristics. Do you ever regret it? She asked, settling beside him on the crystalline bench that had become their favorite spot for evening conversations. The path that brought you here. Marcus looked at his hands, at the jagged lines that would never fully fade, then at the thriving city visible through the garden's transparent walls where humans and Zephyrians now worked side by side on projects that neither species could have accomplished alone. The pain? No. The isolation? Sometimes. But the result? He gestured toward the evidence of their success. Never. The intelligence reports from the Outer Rim suggest that 3 more species have requested mediation services based on our model, Queen Lyrazan said, sharing information that would have been classified just years earlier. The Andromedan trade disputes, the Centauri border conflicts, and the resource wars in the Vega system. All manufactured conflicts. All showing the same patterns we learned to recognize. External weapons sales, coordinated timing of military actions, systematic elimination of moderate voices who might have sought peaceful resolution. Marcus nodded grimly. The exposure of the military-industrial syndicate had revealed a galaxy-wide network of conflict profiteering that made the Humans-Ephirian War look like a small-scale test program. Organizations throughout known space had been using similar tactics to maintain profitable conflicts between species that could have been natural allies. Our success in breaking free from manipulation has given other civilizations hope that they can do the same, he observed. That's more important than any single treaty or alliance. Speaking of which, Queen Lyrazon said, her tone shifting to something that sounded almost nervous, there's something I need to discuss with you. Marcus studied her expression, noting the subtle signs he'd learned to read over years of close collaboration. Official business or personal? Both, actually. The Imperial Council has made a decision regarding your permanent status within the Zephyrian government. I wasn't aware my status was under review. It wasn't, exactly. But circumstances have evolved in ways that require formal clarification of your position. Marcus felt a familiar flutter of uncertainty. 5 years as liaison had given him unprecedented access to Zephyrian leadership and policy-making, but he was still technically a human citizen serving in an advisory capacity. If political winds had shifted. Your Majesty, if there are concerns about my effectiveness or loyalty. Marcus, she interrupted, using his first name in a way that immediately changed the dynamic of their conversation. The Council's decision isn't about your effectiveness. It's about the fact that your relationship with the Imperial leadership has developed beyond what traditional diplomatic protocols can accommodate. I'm not sure I understand. Queen Lyrazon turned to face him directly, her violet eyes holding depths that spoke of decisions made and boundaries crossed. The Council has observed that your advisory role has evolved into something approaching co-leadership. You participate in strategic planning at the highest levels, you have authority to commit Imperial resources to joint initiatives, and you've been granted access to information typically reserved for members of the royal family. Because the work we're doing requires that level of integration. Because, she said gently, somewhere along the way, we stopped being allies and became partners. True partners, in every sense that matters. The words hung between them like a bridge across 5 years of carefully maintained professional distance. Marcus understood that she was acknowledging something they had both been aware of but never directly addressed. Their collaboration had grown beyond official duties into a connection that transcended the boundaries between species, between former enemies, between the roles they had been assigned by circumstance. The Council's decision? He asked quietly. Full citizenship in the Zephyrian Empire, with rank equivalent to High Admiral and formal designation as Imperial Strategic Advisor. Which would make you the first non-Zephyrian to hold such a position in our history. Marcus stared at her, understanding the implications of what she was offering. Not just a job or even a career, but a complete transformation of his identity from human exile to Zephyrian leader. There's more, she continued. The position comes with certain, traditional expectations. Such as formal integration into the imperial household. Which, given the level of partnership we've already developed, would be natural. Marcus felt his understanding crystallize as he recognized what she was really saying. You're asking me to marry you. I'm telling you, Queen Lyrazon said with a smile that held years of suppressed emotion, that the Imperial Council has determined that our partnership has already evolved beyond what unmarried individuals could appropriately maintain. We can either formalize the relationship we've already built, or restructure our professional collaboration to maintain proper boundaries. And your personal preference? My personal preference, she said, reaching out to trace one of the scars on his forearm, is to stop pretending that the most important relationship in both our lives is purely professional. Marcus looked at this remarkable woman who had honored his surrender, respected his resistance, trusted his insights, and shared the burden of building peace between civilizations that had been programmed to destroy each other. The queen whose strength had inspired him to endure torture rather than compromise principles that seemed impossible to defend. The partner whose intelligence and dedication had made their joint success possible. Your Majesty, he said formally. Lyra, she corrected. Just Lyra, when it's personal. Lyra, he repeated, testing the intimacy of using her name without title. The scars that brought us together, they represent everything I was willing to endure to protect both our peoples. But they also represent something else. What? Proof that some connections are worth fighting for, regardless of the obstacles. Is that a yes? Marcus took her hands in his, feeling the electric connection that had sparked between them from their first meeting at Kepler Station. That's a yes to everything. The citizenship, the position, the marriage, the future we're going to build together. The joy that lit her features was like starlight made visible, transforming her from royal authority to the woman who had become the center of his world. The wedding will be the first interspecies royal marriage in galactic history, she said. The political implications will be enormous. The personal implications will be even bigger, Marcus replied. Are you prepared for people to say that the queen of the Zephyrian Empire fell in love with a scarred human prisoner? Are you prepared for people to say that a human war hero chose to spend his life serving an alien queen? I'm prepared for people to say that two individuals from different worlds proved that love can transcend any barrier when it's based on genuine respect and shared purpose. As they kissed for the first time, 5 years of careful professional distance finally giving way to the connection they had both been protecting and nurturing, Marcus understood that his scars told a story with a perfect ending. He had fought for her by fighting against everything she thought she wanted, and in the end, they had both won something greater than either could have achieved alone. The galaxy watched their wedding ceremony 6 months later, the first time in recorded history that representatives from dozens of species gathered to celebrate the union of former enemies who had chosen love over hatred, cooperation over conflict, and hope over the cynical manipulation of those who profited from keeping civilizations apart. Marcus's scars were still visible as he stood beside Lyra during the ceremony, permanent reminders of the price he had paid to protect both their peoples. But they no longer represented suffering, they had become symbols of victory, proof that some principles are worth defending regardless of personal cost, and that the greatest battles are won not by defeating enemies but by transforming them into allies. In his wedding vows, Marcus spoke words that would be remembered throughout galactic history. I fought for you before I knew your name, suffered for you before I understood your heart, and chose to love you before I realized that love could conquer even the forces that seek to divide us. These scars are my promise that I will always fight for us, for our peoples, and for the future we choose to build together. And in gardens where alien flowers bloomed beside earth roses, where the children of two worlds played together under foreign stars, the impossible had become inevitable, a love that had transcended war, death, and the artificial barriers created by those who believed that conflict was stronger than compassion. The scars had healed into something beautiful,